Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to talk about my favorite ways to preserve apples. So let's get to it. As you can see, I just started picking my apples and I'm getting some real nice apples off of the tree. And then of course there's always the little wonky ones that you're going to get when you're growing your own apples. And there's a reason why I set those out, because I'm going to get to that in a minute. Now, the way I used to preserve my apples, aside from making apple butter, was to slice them up and then freeze them in food saver bags. Now, I do like freezing stuff and using the food saver for that because it takes up so much less room in the freezer than freezing in jars. Though I would love to freeze in glass rather than plastic, because I just really hate plastic. However, since it's in its freezer form, I don't worry as much about any of the chemicals of the plastic getting into the food. Now, personally, I would not heat the food up in the bags, because once you start heating plastic, then you're going to have an issue with the chemicals getting into your food. But because I like to freeze a lot of things like my berries and zucchini, and we do like to get a side of beef every now and then when a local person is selling it, grass-fed beef, then we'll do that. So my freezers can get pretty full. And one of the ways I started preserving more with the apples was dehydrating them. Now, I didn't used to do this because I'm the only one that really likes to eat dehydrated apples around here. But then I learned about making pies with dehydrated apples, and boy, they are so good, using dehydrated apples to make pies. And here is a jar of some of my dehydrated apples. This is from 2015, and I just opened this up, and that's why there's some gone, because I was eating on some the other day. 2015, and I have several dozen jars of dehydrated apples right now, because I just don't make a whole lot of pies like I used to, but I have them for if I need to. But there's also other good things you can do with dehydrated apples, and I'm sure a lot of you may have some really good suggestions, so please add those in the comments down below, because I would like to read them, and I'm sure a lot of my other followers would enjoy reading what other things you can do with dehydrated apples. Now, one of the other things I do besides making dried apple pie or just snacking on them is I like to cut them up. They're really easy to cut up with like some kitchen shears or whatever, and then add them to Mr. Rain's oatmeal. I've also taken a few dehydrated apples and thrown them into my tea when I'm making a nice spicy like cinnamon clove kind of tea, and then throw a couple of apple slices in there to get a good apple cinnamon tea, and it's really very good. And plus you're getting all the good stuff that's in the apples. Now, I'm not going to be dehydrating apples today, but I'll talk a little bit about how I do it and some of the options you can use. But first, I want to show you another way I like to preserve my apples. My second favorite way is in the form of apple butter. And I like to be creative with my apple butter. I very rarely just make plain apple butter. And when I do, it's always a good spicy cinnamon clove and ginger apple butter. But this one I made the other day, and this is made with some blueberries, because I still have blueberries from 2015 I'm trying to use up. So about a pint of blueberries and a bunch of apples, fresh this year, and some rose petals. So this is apple blueberry rose petal butter right here, and it turned out pretty good. Now, one of my favorites when it comes to apple butter is to use blueberries and lemon slices. Like put the whole, wash the lemon really good, put the whole lemon slice in there and pulverize it good, and then add it into the apple butter. It is so good. Blueberry lemon apple butter. Very good. I highly suggest it. And sometimes I'll add the cinnamon, a little bit of cinnamon when I do that, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on the flavor I'm looking for. I do like to mix it up. Now, though we don't eat a lot of apple butter like on sandwiches or toast or anything like that, we do from time to time. One of my favorite things to do with the apple butter is to also add this into Mr. Rain's oatmeal, because usually he's going to put sugar in it anyway. So instead, I just cook the apple butter into his oatmeal, and then he doesn't add any sugar, extra sugar to it, because it's plenty sweet enough with the apple butter. Oh, and by the way, when I make my apple butter, and eventually I'll probably put a video out. I did try to do a video of this, but some of my files ended up corrupted, so I'm sorry. But the next time I do a batch of apple butter, if you guys want to see how I make mine, I will be glad to do a video on that. Please let me know in comments below if you'd like to see that. But I do use, this is the one thing I will use coconut sugar in. I don't like coconut sugar in a whole bunch of things, but I love it in my apple butter because for some reason in the apple butter it seems to give it a nice caramely kind of flavor, which is really good. So anyway, now I'm not big in making applesauce, though I did make some last year. We just really don't eat applesauce, but I do like to have applesauce on hand because it's really good for making like an apple bread or using in place of an oil when you're baking certain things, certain types of cakes and stuff. You can use that in replace of your fat. Okay, so now the next thing I want to show you is how I like to prepare my apples when I'm either using them in apple butter or dehydrating them or whatever I'm going to do. But today I am not going to preserve these apples through dehydrating or apple butter or applesauce or freezing. I'm going to do something a little different that I've done before in the past with a mix of other fruits with the apples. This time I'm going to use just the apples, and that is going to be fermenting using my own raspberry fermentation starter. And you can find how I make this right up here, and possibly I'll link to it again at the end of this video. So as far as the preparing, I have this, I can't remember the actual brand name of it, but I did buy this one on Amazon, so I will link to it below. Oh, Back to Basics, that's what it's called, Back to Basics. And I really like this one. It's a good heavy duty, not cheap plastic. And it, instead of having the clamp, you can get the kind with the C clamp that clamps to the end of your counter. This one has the suction, which I prefer because I don't have a lot of room for moving around in certain places where I can actually clamp this. And then it just gets in the way when you do that. So I prefer the suction method. So I'll show you how I do this to get it to stick really good. The first thing I like to do is to rinse the bottom of the apple peeler, of the suction part, to make sure there's no debris on it, but also because the water is going to help give it a good seal or a good suction onto the countertop. Then you're just going to kind of press it down, and you should have a little lever here, and you just push that over and you'll kind of feel it take suction. Now this one didn't take, as you can see. However, if you just keep holding it and keep doing this, I felt it that time. If it feels like it's just not good enough, you can just keep pumping it like that until you know it's on there good and it's not going to move. For me, I don't use the peeler option on this because I just don't like the way, and this is, to me, it's this way with any apple peeler. I think it just takes off a little too much fruit. I would rather use my own handheld apple peeler, and to me, it's just as fast, because the other odd thing is when you're working with little odd shaped apples like this, which is why I set these aside, especially ones like this, it just doesn't peel right. So if you're getting apples from your own tree or even somebody else's tree and not buying them from the store where they're all perfect and uniform, then it's really better just to peel by hand. And I find it really isn't that much faster having the peeler here because of the fact that you still end up having to go and peel off some edges where it misses, like on each of the ends. So, but I still love it for the slicing and coring aspect of it. And I'm going to do 2 jars of apples because I'm going to also do an experiment. And I'll do a few apples in front of the camera so you can see how I do this. This is the OXO brand peeler, and I love it. It's been my favorite hand peeler. But anyway, I just, like I say, I peel by hand. And sometimes I move in a circle like this, kind of a continuous movement. And sometimes it just depends on the shape of the apple. Usually if it's a nice shape like this one is, I'll just move in a circle. Now I'm going to take my peel and throw it into this jar. This is if you choose to peel. Now some people may prefer to leave their peels on the apples. Mr. Rain doesn't like apple peels on things unless he's eating the apple raw, so yeah. Anyway, press it onto the pegs, push it up you kind of got to loosen this thing, push it up to the blade there, and then just start cutting. That quick. I've got slices, so then I'll just do one slice like that. And then take the apples and I'm going to separate them out and put them in my jar. That quick and easy. So that right there, the slicing to me is the part that takes the longest, not the peeling. So and separating the core out. And so to me, this is just a really great method. And then I take the core, and this is why I don't mind having a thinner peel. Like on the peaches, I like to have a little more peel on it. It's because I'm also throwing the cores into this jar. So what do you think I'm going to do with this? Yep, I'm going to make vinegar with that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue slicing apples, and I'll probably speed the rest of this up. And when I've got my jars all full, then I'll show you the next step. All right, I'm going to pause here on the peeling and the slicing because this is where I'm going to add my fermentation starter, or if I'm putting spices or anything like that in, that's where I like to do this whenever I'm fermenting anything. So I'm using the raspberry fermentation starter. What I need, I've got quart jars, so I need a 1/4 cup per jar. So there's 1/4 cup. One jar and a 1/4 cup for the other jar. And then I'm just going to add my fruit back in here. Now, at any time, you can take out all this fruit and put in fresh fruit if you want. And it doesn't have to be the same fruit that was already in there. Somebody asked a good question the other day about, can you mix your fruits? Yeah, why not? I just try them separately because I want to find out every time I experiment, I want to find out which ones are going to give me the best ferment. And I'm finding the raspberries are just awesome. As are the raisins and blackberries, but the blueberries, not quite so much. But you can see what I did here. I just added a little bit more sugar. And now I'm going to top this off with some filtered rainwater. Put my lid back on, shake it to kind of stir that sugar in, and then I'll leave it on the counter for the rest of the day before I put it back in the fridge. So now, one of the other things I'm going to experiment with is that I was thinking cinnamon apple sounds really good, but I went and looked it up because I was suspicious that cinnamon, knowing the properties of cinnamon, would probably slow down the fermentation process. And sure enough, I did come across that. However, I'm still going to try it, but I'm only going to try it in one jar so I can do a side-by-side comparison and see which one ferments faster. And if they're the same, then we'll know for sure that the cinnamon is not really going to affect the process. And cloves, I love, love, love cloves, and I've been tempted on doing that. So I'm putting about a tablespoon, maybe a little better, of cinnamon in that one. Now this is a Ceylon cinnamon, and as you can see, I like lots of cinnamon. So make sure if you're using cinnamon, if you've got a lot of cassia cinnamon, if it doesn't say what kind of cinnamon it is, it's cassia cinnamon. You really want to stop using that because it's just, in the long run, it is really not good for you. You want to get Ceylon cinnamon. What you can do though, if you're like me and you have a lot of cassia cinnamon on hand, like I did before I learned about the Ceylon cinnamon, is you can use your cassia cinnamon in the garden for pest control. Works really good. Something else I wanted to show you about using the slicer when you have these odd apples that, this one actually isn't as bad as the one I just did a little bit ago, but you'll have where the core is completely off center like this. I find it easier when you go to line it up on your slicer is to put the stem side on first, not the end side. And you'll be more apt to get a good lineup on the core, so you end up with you're less likely to end up with core in your slices. So this one turned out pretty good. I still got a little bit of core in there, but it, in general, it just works a little better. So I can just slice off that and then throw it in with my vinegar. Okay, so now I've got my fermentation starter in my jars. This one's got the cinnamon in it. And now all I got to do is top them off the rest of the way with my filtered rainwater. Yes, you can use distilled water. I had somebody ask that question. Very good question. That's not going to hurt anything. I would suggest looking for spring water. That is if you don't have a good well water. If you're on city tap water, you really want to avoid that, especially when you're fermenting. Now, I am using the Tatler lids. I've been leaning toward, now that I'm getting more and more of these, I really prefer them, especially for fermenting. And I'm going to put the lid on tight to start with so I can shake the spices and the fermentation starter around in there. Of course, this one doesn't have any spices. We're just going to do this one as is. And what I recommend, which I forgot to do with the other one, is just after you shake it up, just loosen it just a tiny bit before setting it aside to ferment. Now, for my vinegar, I'm going to go ahead and add maybe about an 1/8 cup of sugar into this. I did start a batch the other day when I was making the rose petal blueberry apple butter, and I went ahead and threw a few rose petals into the vinegar, the apple peel vinegar, just to see what kind of color it would give it. Thought maybe it might make it look a little prettier. All right, so again, if you want to weigh down your stuff, you can do the jar method. Now, I had people tell me saying that they put the little 1/2 pint jar in there and it actually caused the water to wick out more. I've never done it that way, so I wouldn't have known that. And but I've had people tell me they've weighed their stuff down and still ended up with mold on the top. So you just got to realize that mold is going to be a part of it. It's not an issue. You just lift it off and throw it away. And then you just cover it with a cloth, a clean cloth, and a rubber band. And let it sit for 30 days. You will get a gelatinous layer on a good vinegar, especially when it sits, that can get that thick. And that's just your SCOBY. Your vinegar SCOBY. Instead of a kombucha SCOBY, it's a vinegar SCOBY. And also, if you see any white sediment at the bottom, that is also the mother, just like the gelatinous top layer. Those are healthy and expected. When I dry my apples, since this is already open, because I just opened it, once I get my jar filled up with my apples, I usually use a used ball lid or cur lid, and I put that on there. And anyone who's been watching my channel for a while has probably seen me do this a zillion times, but I always get new people, so I like to show it. Now, this is a food saver top. I have a regular mouth and a wide mouth like this. Just press that down on top. I found these on Amazon, and I will link to these below. And I will also link to this great little brake bleeder. Now, you can use your food saver to vacuum seal, but I prefer this method over the food saver. I have less issues with it, and it's a non-electric way to do it. So, and then I just pump this up to PSI 15. Usually I will go just a hair above. Let me get this over here so you can see. You push and hold that tip into the top of your food saver lid thing, whatever it's called, and just keep holding until you get that pumped up all the way. Pull that out, and when you take this off, your jar will be sealed. See? And it's always done quite well for me. Don't forget to comment on what you like to do with your apples, not just the dehydrated apples, but just what are some other interesting things you like to do with your apples when you're getting your harvest in. All right, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.